Known as the state of New York's watchdog agency, the Office of the Inspector General is an agency that investigates corruption, fraud, and criminal activity within state government, holding those who abuse their benefits accountable. And joining me now in studio is New York State Inspector General Lucy Lang. We want to thank you so much for coming to Buffalo and taking some time to spend with us here at Channel 2.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be in Buffalo.
We do know that there are a lot of people who are probably completely unaware of what your office is and what it does. Explain to them what this office is responsible for doing.
My Office of Investigators, Attorneys, and Auditors oversees investigation into allegations of fraud and corruption in the state executive agencies, the welfare system, and the workers' compensation system.
One of the stories that we covered, I think it was back in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, had to do with racial disparities and injustices that were taking place within the New York State prison system. Is this an issue rather that your office has revisited since then?
You know, I was just thinking about that investigation yesterday because it is in part the eclipse that brought me to Buffalo this week. And I was remembering a visit to a local prison here in Western New York when I came upon a man who was looking at the New York Times in his bunk in the state prison. And it was when photos from the Webb telescope had just been put out. And this man who had served 20-something years in state prison was filled with awe and wonder at looking at these pictures of the cosmos. And I think so many of us had that feeling yesterday when we were watching the eclipse. But yes, it has been the commitment of our office to continue to hear the voices of men like that on the inside, to continue to monitor things like racial disparities. And we're very fortunate that after we put that report out, the Department of Corrections has complied with the recommendations we made to reduce and ultimately, hopefully, eliminate racial disparities in prison discipline.
Can you be a little bit more specific and explain to us exactly what your office did? Like, what were some of those complaints and what was the end result?
Well, in that particular case, it came out of a New York Times investigation that found that, of course, as we all know, there are racial disparities in terms of who's admitted to prison, but that actually there are also disparities in terms of how justice is administered within the prison walls. And so what we did was look back over the course of a period of years to determine whether that had improved since the original investigation, and sadly found that it had not. But we believe that with the integration of our recommendations, the Department of Corrections is very much on track to rectifying it going forward.
Do you think people will be surprised to know that your office is also working on behalf of those who are incarcerated?
Whether people are surprised or not, I am very proud to say that we get complaints all the time from incarcerated New Yorkers and their families, and part of that is because of the tremendous outreach we have done in going into prisons, working with community groups, and educating the public about our commitment to serving as a watchdog over state prisons.
Let's switch topics. Financial crimes. We know that your office for sure has dealt with financial crimes, whether it's workers' compensation fraud, which appears to be big and still growing from time to time, welfare fraud, unearned wages. Why do we see this issue keep popping up, specifically here in Western New York?
Well, there are state agencies where there's a lot of volume in and around Western New York. So we have seen the abuse of the workers' compensation system by, for example, people who work in the Department of Corrections. We have seen the absence of appropriate workers' compensation support amongst contractors, and we have seen wage theft. So those are all areas where we direct a lot of resources. We have also recently had a number of cases of abuses of the welfare system in and around Western New York, including a recent case in which a man was receiving SNAP benefits, supplemental nutrition assistance benefits, in the names of his two children over whom he actually had no custody. And when something like that happens, it really jeopardizes the system that is designed to protect the most vulnerable New Yorkers, to protect children just like his. So we make sure that where people would take advantage of the welfare system, that they are identified, investigated, and held accountable.
Did you see an uptick, especially during the pandemic and after the pandemic, because it seems like people were doing whatever they could to get by, even though so many people were getting Extra benefits.
An area where we saw a tremendous uptick is in unemployment insurance fraud, where these desperately needed programs were created to funnel resources to New Yorkers who couldn't work for whatever reason. But of course, wherever there is a dedication of resources, there's the potential for fraud. So we continue to work alongside many of our state, local, and federal partners to identify folks who have abused those resources.
What triggers the alarm for your office?
Well, New Yorkers who suspect fraud or abuse in any of those systems are invited to submit a complaint through 1-800-DO-RIGHT or through our website, ig.ny.gov, or through any of our social media at New York State IG. Many of our investigations come from reports by the public who see that something is just not right, and we rely on them to let us know.
All right, New York State Inspector General Lucy Lang, thank you so much for joining us at Channel 2.
Thank you for having me, Claudine, and thank you, Buffalo.
Thank you for being here.